So I have finished the discussion of the classical model, and now we are going to return to the complete Keynesian model. We had discussed two components of this model before in the earlier semester. We had looked at the commodity market in isolation in the simple Keynesian model. We had incorporated the bond market and money market and discussed the ISLM model. Now, in the discussion of the complete Keynesian model, we are also going to incorporate another sector, that is the labor market, so that it becomes comparable with the classical system. Okay. Now, the fundamental difference with the classical model is in the role of aggregate demand. So let us start with the Keynesian conception or Keynesian ideas about aggregate demand. Now, equilibrium in the Keynesian model is, as we have discussed it so far in the ISLM model, is attained by the combination of income and interest rate, Y and R, that ensures that two conditions are satisfied. In the commodity market, the demand for output should equal to the supply of output. In the money market, again we have the equality of demand and supply, but this time it is for money. Now, let's consider the commodity market. What ensures that demand for output is equal to supply of output? I mean, we can have conditions when it's not possible to increase supply and other problems. Now, Keynes assumes explicitly, in fact, that whatever amount the economy or the consumers and investors and the government sector demands will be available at the given price. So there are two issues over here. One is the price is given. So price is not an important factor over here. If there's an increase in demand, this should not affect price. And the second factor is that whatever amount you demand will be available. In the classical system, remember that we had the Say's law, which said that the economy is self-adjusting and supply creates its own demand. But what is the mechanism in the Keynesian case? In the Keynesian case, it's a different type of mechanism. It's an assumption about the supply curve. The assumption is that output is below the capacity level. So at any point of time, given the fixed stock of capital, given the population which defines a certain labor force, the economy has a capacity to produce. Okay, so this capacity can be, let us say, 1,000, 5,000, whatever. The actual output, the actual demand is far below this capacity level. Therefore, when there's an increase in demand, it does not put an upward pressure on prices. Okay. Let's see. So what I'm saying is that this is the cap. Sorry. Okay. So let us say that this is the capacity output. Okay. So the demand is far below this. it's something like this. So given the price that is prevailing, demand is only up to this level. Therefore, if demand increases from D1 to, let us say, D2, it is possible for the economy to meet this extra demand without a corresponding increase in prices. The increase in demand does not put an upward pressure on prices. Uh, so, in other words, there's no demand pull inflation. I think you have discussed inflation in the earlier class, earlier semester, or is it in this semester?
Sir, in SEM 2.
Okay, so you know what is demand pull or cost push inflation, right? So in this case, we see that if demand is going up, it does not lead to an increase in prices. So there's no demand pull inflation. However, you can have another type of inflation, which is cost push. So your output is being increased, and if your output is increased from, let us say, y1 to, let us say, y2, if your output is increased, that means you're employing more labor. The marginal productivity should fall. However, Keynes makes the assumption that at very low levels of output, the marginal productivity of labor will be like this, almost flat. So the decrease in marginal productivity is either zero or it is marginal. Okay. So if marginal product is more or less constant, then the wages also will be more or less constant. W by P, we know that marginal product is equal to W by P. So if MP is constant, W by P will, real wages will also be constant. So when I move from here to here, I'm employing more labor. Real wages will not change, and therefore costs will not rise. So there's no cost push inflation either. Okay. Now this type of assumption is plausible when demand is very low, when the economy is in the bottom phase of the trade cycle. In other words, it is facing depression. In
Sir,
that
can
case,
you
we can
show the previous slide? Yes, sir.
so in the situation that I've described, an economy which is in the which is in depression. In that case, the supply curve can be assumed to be horizontal. It's parallel to the x-axis, and whatever is the level of demand, whether it is going like this or going like this, it's possible for the producers to increase output without a change in either costs or prices. Now, the assumptions of this model, where the supply curve is horizontal, is the assumptions are very restrictive, and it's a very special situation. In the general case, when the economy is either going on the upswing or falling down, you have moderate changes. It's not satisfied. In such cases, the aggregate supply curve is more likely to be upward sloping, like this. Okay, so that means price and output will be jointly determined by supply and demand factors. See, in this model, the position of the demand curve determines only output, not the price. The price is constant over here. But in this model, depending on the position of the demand curve, the output will change, but the price will also change. If we change the slope of this curve, then for the same demand curve, the price and output, the both the price and output can change. Okay. So in this model, demand is the crucial factor. In the classical model, where the supply curve was vertical, demand did not have any role. But in the general case, when the supply curve is upward sloping, both demand and supply plays a role. Now, the factors that affect aggregate demand in the Keynesian model determines the position of the ISLM curves. Okay, the ISLM curve, in the ISLM model, we have the commodity market and therefore the commodity demand. So, the factors that it determine the position of the ISLM curves will also determine the equilibrium combination of Y and R. So any factor which shifts the or which determines where the IS curve or where the LM curve will be located will also determine the or will also have an influence on what is the equilibrium combination of Y and R, income and interest rate. So for any particular, at a given point of time, we have an equilibrium, we have a particular level of price and we have the corresponding Y and R. Okay. But in order to construct the demand curve, one point is not sufficient. So what I'm seeing is over here is that in the ISLM curve, once we have determined the equilibrium, this is the IS curve and this is the LM curve, and this has been drawn for, let us say, price equal to P1. So we have Y1. So that means for this P1, I have Y1. Okay. So that means I've just got a point. But this point will not give me the aggregate demand curve. What I need is that suppose the price changes, it becomes P2. How will the ISLM curves change? And then how will it generate a new equilibrium point? So let price change to P2. We have a new equilibrium in the ISLM model. And now the equilibrium output is Y2. Okay. So this can be drawn over here. Okay. Now we can connect the 2 points and get an aggregate demand curve. So therefore, what we have done in the last semester was find out the determine the equilibrium in the money market and commodity market when prices were constant. Now we have to introduce price changes. So price changes, we get a new equilibrium in the ISLM model, and this helps us to generate an aggregate demand curve. Okay. Is this clear, everyone?
Sir, could you show the
Now let us
previous
see.
slide once? Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Okay. So what we have to do is we have to take we are taking prices for granted. Now we have to change the price and see how the IS curve changes, how the LM curve changes. Okay, now let's focus on the IS curve first. In the IS market, the demand side is given by IR, I which is a function of R, G which is autonomous, a policy variable, savings is a function of Y, and taxes which is again a sorry, it should be equal to over here. Yeah. So this is the equilibrium condition in the IS market. And G and T are policy variables, so they are uh, exogenous to the system. They are given. I and S are endogenous, but if you look at them, both of them are real variables that are unaffected by changes in the price level. So price doesn't come into the picture over here. And therefore, the IS curve will not be affected by price level changes. Okay. So if price changes, we can so we draw IS for a particular price. Let us say P1. If the price changes, the IS curve will remain same. So whatever the price level, the IS curve will be unchanged. Okay. Therefore, we have to turn now to the money market, LM market, and see what is the influence of prices. In the LM market, we see that a real money supply is equal to real money demand. M by P is equal to L Y R. We have just subsumed KY into a grant into the LY in the LR portion. Okay, we have just simplified the money demand function. We have not written it in the KY plus L form. Okay. Now, as long as price is constant, is there's no difference between real money and nominal money values. Okay, we can just assume that there's no difference between them. Suppose price rises. Okay, so P is rising over here. What will happen to M by P? It is going to fall, right? Now, think of this as M by P as small m. Okay. When M is the real money supply. Okay. Now, if M rises, if P rises, this small m falls. What will happen if capital M falls? This is again leading to a decline in small m. So a decline in the nominal money supply and an increase in price level has the same effect. Small m will decrease. Okay. Now in the earlier semester, we had shown that if there's a decline in the money supply, then the LM curve is going to shift rightwards. Okay, so this is the LM curve, it is going to shift like this. Okay. Now, if the two are virtually same, in that case, an increase in price level will also have the same effect. The LM curve will shift leftwards. Is it clear? Then we'll come to the diagram.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So now the analysis becomes much simpler. Here we can see that M0, the nominal money supply, is constant. We are increasing the price level. P0 is smallest, P1 is slightly larger, P2 is largest. Okay, so as the price level is going up, the real money supply is declining. So that means the LM curve will shift rightwards. And we have equilibrium at 3 points. So corresponding to P0, we have equilibrium at C, where the equilibrium output is Y0. Price P1, equilibrium is B, output is Y1. And in case of P2, equilibrium at A, which means output is Y2. So now we can have construct a demand curve P0, Y0, P1, Y1, P2, Y2, right? We have three combinations of prices and output. So we simply plot them in price output space to get the aggregate demand curve. Given money supply, remember this, the nominal money supply is fixed at M0. Is it clear, everyone? Okay. Will I wait or go on to the next slide?
Sir, could you please wait for a minute?
Yeah, yeah.
Could you please show the second slide once?
আচ্ছা এটা হয়ে যাক তারপর আমি যাচ্ছি
Done, sir. Thank you, sir.
না না কোনটি ছিল এইটা তো নয় এইটের কথা বলছেন এইটের কথা
Yes, sir. This one, sir.
আচ্ছা
Yes, sir. Done.
just one sec please okay okay so what we have done is we have shown that price in order to construct the aggregate demand curve we need a price output combination when output is determined in the ISLM model. So we have to see how price affects the IS curve or LM curve. It doesn't affect the IS curve. We focus on the LM curve. The LM curve shifts to the right. So if price increases, the equilibrium occurs at lower levels of output. So we simply take the combinations of price and Y and price and output and we construct the demand curve. Okay. So this aggregate demand curve that we have constructed, that is this one, this aggregate demand curve, reflects two things. The monetary influences, factors which affect the LM schedule, right? Secondly, it also affects the direct influences on aggregate demand, the factors which affect the ICE schedule. Now, I had said that price doesn't affect the ICE schedule, right? So, why is the second factor important? The reason is that, yeah, if price changes, the IS curve will remain same. Okay. But the position of the IS curve that will determine what is aggregate demand. Like for instance, over here, let me break it and show it. I don't want to keep this. Oh, sorry. Suppose instead of this IS curve, you had an IS curve like, sorry, IS curve like this. It is constant. When price changes, the IS curve will remain same. But look at the price output combination. These are different from the one that we had drawn earlier. So although price is not a factor determining which changes the IS curve, the IS curve still is important. We have to understand the position of the IS curve, and we have to understand what are the factors which determine the position of the IS curve, because that is going to affect the equilibrium combination of Y that is going to be demanded, and hence it's going to influence the aggregate demand curve. So anything that changes, any factor, what we are saying is that any factor that affects the equilibrium level, the equilibrium income in the ISLM model, okay, that is going to lead to a change in the aggregate demand curve. So that means if suppose there's a change, uh, why does the IS curve change? Let me ask that. In the ISLM model, a change in the price does not affect the IS curve. But does it mean that the IS curve is constant? Or can we change the position of the IS curve using some other variable? কি হলো? সবাই চুপ? Suppose, forget about price, okay? Forget about price. Go back to the earlier semester. We want to shift the position of the IS curve. How can we do so?
Sir, by introducing fiscal policy or autonomous investments change or autonomous consumption change.
দেখো অটোনোমাস ইনভেস্টমেন্ট অটোনোমাসি এগুলো তো এক্সোজেনাস হয়ে যাচ্ছে, হ্যাঁ। কনজাম্পশন ডিপেন্ডস আপন ইনকাম, সিমিলারলি private investment depends upon rate of interest, so we can't change it, they change by themselves. But you're right with respect to the first part. আমরা যদি গভর্নমেন্ট স্পেন্ডিং বাড়াই, the IS curve will shift outwards. If we increase taxes, the IS curve will shift inwards. So changes in the fiscal policy will lead to changes in the IS curve. Therefore, it is going to affect the aggregate demand curve also. IS curve পজিশনটা যে চেঞ্জ করে যাবে, for a given P, your aggregate demand will be different. মানে ধরো আমার এরকম একটা IS curve আছে, ঠিক আছে? IS curve when let us say G is equal to G1. এবার আমি LM কার্ভটা আঁকলাম for P1, আর একটা LM কার্ভ আঁকলাম for P2, ঠিক আছে? তাহলে এইটা হচ্ছে আমার, this is Y1, this is Y2, okay? So the aggregate demand curve can be drawn like this. This is Y1, this is Y2. So this will be P2, this is P1. This is aggregate demand 1. Now suppose I change increase government spending. তাহলে কি হচ্ছে? For the same level of prices P1. Instead of Y1, I have Y dash 1. এখানে কি হচ্ছে? We have a bit of a problem. Let's make it Y prime 2. ঠিক আছে? তাহলে now for P1, what is my equilibrium? What is my demand? It is no longer Y1, but it is Y prime 1. এরকম হয়ে গেছে, এতটা বাড়ছে ধরো সাপোজ। ঠিক আছে, ফর P2 it is এরকম। So this has been drawn for G2, this has been drawn for G1. So if the government spending changes, the aggregate demand curve will shift and you are going to have a new demand curve. Is it clear, everyone? আচ্ছা, এটা লিখে নাও, লিখে নিয়ে আমাকে বলো। Change the slide. By the way, when I'm presenting something, I can't see the Google Meet screen. So if you're tapping out something in the chat box, I can't, or raising a hand, I can't see either of them. তো কেউ যদি মানে ধরো তোমরা টাইপ করো, someone has an audio problem and wants to type out a message, I would request the others to please let me know what the message is. And I can just see the what is the PowerPoint screen, nothing else. Okay, is it okay? পরের স্লাইডে যাব?
Just a minute, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir, done.
Okay. Okay, now consider a change in the money supply. Okay. The LM curve shifts rightward. Achha. We are talking about an increase in money supply, okay, which is the opposite of price changes. মানে এইখানে আমি যেটা করেছি আইএস কার্ভের জন্য, সেটা এলএম কার্ভের জন্য দেখাচ্ছি যে মানি ভেরিয়েবলস অ্যাফেক্ট এগ্রিগেট ডিমান্ড। সো ইফ দ্য এলএম কার্ভ money supply increases, the LM curve will shift outwards, and you can see that you have an increased level of output. Okay, but the price is remaining the same. এইটা খেয়াল রাখো। আগেবার কি হচ্ছিল? We were moving along the demand curve. That means prices were changing. How is output changing? Here, for a given level of price, output is falling from Y0 to Y1. Okay, so prices are given, output is Y0. Sorry, output has not fallen, output has increased. So given price of P0, output was Y0. It has gone up as a result of the increase in nominal money supply to Y1. So that means you cannot represent this using the same demand curve. You have to have a new demand curve. So this demand curve has been drawn for M0. This one has been drawn from M1. So a change in the money supply will also lead to a shift in demand curve. আমি এতটা অবধি বলছি, এটা আমি পরে আসছি। So look at this, go back to the diagram and see it's basically the same concept. I'm holding prices constant, I'm increasing government spending. For the same level of prices, output changes. So for P1, output changes from here to here. So I require it's a shift to a new demand curve. Similarly, over here, keeping prices constant at P0, I'm changing money supply, output rises. This is reflected in a shift in the demand curve. Clear?
Sir, one question. So in the third line, you have written AD schedule also shifts to the left. So
Oh, sorry.
right. Yes.
এখানে আরো সাইনটাও রয়েছে না, সরি ইটস আ টাইপো, থ্যাংক ইউ ফর কলিং। আচ্ছা, এইটা তোমরা লিখে নাও, আমি তোমাদের এটা পরে এক্সপ্লেন করছি। ওকে, have you all finished?
So 1 minute.
ওকে,
Done, sir.
Okay. So what I want you to do now is how does the tax, it is, let us suppose this is the ISLM curve, this is the IS curve, and let us say this is the LM curve. আচ্ছা। Explain how the tax rate will affect the either the tax rate or lump sum tax মানে just তোমার tax policy টা, how will the tax policy affect the aggregate demand curve?
So by shifts in the IS curve.
আচ্ছা, একটু explain করো because
Sir,
so
leftward shift hobe if
so
tax increases.
so this IS curve has been drawn for a particular, let us say, tax rate. So we assume that the tax rate is increased. Actually, it doesn't occur. So in that case, this is going to be like this, right? So let's go back to over here. So this is the LM curve, which has been drawn for price equal to P0. So this is E1 corresponding to T1 and P0. This is E2, which corresponds to T2, but the price level is the same. এটা Y2 হলো, এটা Y1 হলো। Price is same, so I keep it like this. Okay, so that means the aggregate demand curve, the first aggregate demand curve will pass through a point like this. When the tax rate goes up, the price is same, but the demand will fall. Okay, so let me just finish this. So the aggregate demand curve will be এরকম। So this is AD1 drawn for T1. This is AD2 which is drawn for T2. ঠিক আছে? So this corresponds to E1, this corresponds to E2. এটা খেয়াল রাখো, this is price, ওকে ওকে। তো এইটা একটু তোমরা নিজেরা করার চেষ্টা করো। I won't keep this, I won't show it, but you should understand the principle. If you can't, I'll show it in the next class. কিন্তু তোমরা নিজেরা একটু রিকনস্ট্রাক্ট করার চেষ্টা করো। This is what I've shown before, the increase in G, how this will affect the position of the aggregate demand curve. Now, what is important over here is, let us see how G affects. We know that G will lead to a shift in the parallel shift in the IS curve. The IS curve will shift rightwards, and this will be reflected in an outward shift in the aggregate demand curve. এটা তো মুছে দিয়েছি আমি। Anyway, you can also construct that and check it. তাহলে when G is increasing, government spending is increasing, the aggregate demand curve shifts from this curve to this curve. What is the impact on prices and why? Prices and output. If the Keynesian aggregate, if we take a Keynesian aggregate supply curve, what will happen? What is the Keynesian aggregate supply curve look like? We have drawn over here 3 supply curves, YS0, YS1, and YS2.
Sir, YS2.
Yeah, the Keynesian aggregate supply curve is horizontal. So demand has gone up. How much has demand gone up? From Y0 to Y2. How much has output gone up? Output
Y0
also
to
has
Y2.
gone up from here to here. So this is also Y2 minus Y0, right? The increase in output is the same. The increase in demand is equal to increase in supply. What Keynes was saying, that the level of supply is demand determined. So if demand goes up, supply is going to go up by the same amount. What has happened to prices? এখানে প্রাইসটা কি বাড়ছে? From if you move from here to here,
No, sir.
prices are same. Now let us take a rising supply curve. তাহলে এখানে কি হচ্ছে? আচ্ছা, এখানে একটু আমাকে লেবেল করতে দাও। This is E0. I'm calling all of them E1. This is the Keynesian case. আচ্ছা, this is the classical case, vertical supply curve. And we can say that this is a normal case. It's lying in between the two extremes. What happens over here? Does output increase?
Yes, sir, but a less
If you
amount.
have, হ্যাঁ, আউটপুটটা ডিমান্ড বাড়ছে কতটা? Y2, but output increases only up till Y1. ঠিক আছে? So the aggregate supply increases by Y1 minus Y0, which is less than the increase in aggregate demand. ঠিক আছে? কেন এটা হচ্ছে? Why? What is the reason? Because prices are rising, P rises, so that demand falls along the new demand curve. আমার এই y0 to y2, this is a shift in the demand curve, but then price rises. So what happens? We move along the upwards along this new demand curve. প্রাইসটা ডিমান্ডটা বেড়ে আলটিমেটলি এতটা হচ্ছে। And if we have the vertical supply curve, the classical case, the price level rises substantially and wipes out the increase in demand. তার মানে যখন আমি জিটা বাড়াচ্ছি, আমার increase in demand হচ্ছে, which is positive, is y2 minus y0. But this leads to a rise in prices which is such that the demand falls, and this is exactly equal to the increase. So there's a cancelling out. So in case of the vertical supply curve, when it's not possible to increase supply, you simply have inflation, which wipes out the additional demand. So the economy is basically a supply-driven economy. So we have two extremes. Keynesian case, completely demand-driven. Classical, completely supply-driven. And the E1 in position, the upward rising supply curve, represents a in-between case. Please let me know when you finish.
Done, sir. Thank you so much.
ঠিক আছে, আমি শিফট করছি। সবাই শেষ করেছো তো? আচ্ছা। So we have seen that is the difference between the Keynesian case and the supply and the Keynesian model and the classical model is with regard to the supply curve? Is the supply curve vertical, horizontal? What is it? So we have to look to the factors which determine the supply schedule, the aggregate supply curve. That means we have to go to the look at the assumptions underlying the labor market. Now the classical model assumes that demand for labor, supply of labor, both depends upon real wages. You have perfect information, suppliers know what the other producers are charging, sorry, what the different firms are charging or paying, what the different workers are getting. Similarly, all the firms know what the other firms are charging and what the workers are getting. Okay, so there's perfect information. Another implicit assumption is that labor is homogeneous. Okay, so we are not introducing differences, okay, wage differences between workers. Okay, the money wages adjust equating demand for demand for labor and supply of labor. Okay, so you have the demand supply depends upon real wages, but if there's any excess demand or excess supply, the change is in the money wages, not in the real wages. So this assumption leads to the vertical aggregate supply curve. Okay, so in that case, the output is supply determined. As we have seen, there is no role of demand. If there are changes in demand, this will lead to price changes, but output will not change. Now, this conflicts with the central feature of Keynesian analysis that the output that is produced depends upon demand only. Whatever is the demand, producers will supply that level of output. If demand goes up, output will increase by the same amount. The reason why the two models are differing is that the classical theory is based on the classical auction market, what we call the classical auction market characterization. We have perfect information and there's bargaining between the firms and the workers, and this leads to contracts being set in money wages. This is fundamentally incompatible with the Keynesian system. The classical model assumes that if there's full employment, there's no change in money wages. If there's excess demand for labor, what will happen? What will happen to money wages?
They
So
will
real
rise.
wages will.
না, আমরা ক্লাসিক্যাল মডেলে কি দেখেছিলাম? The contract is for the money wages.
Money wage.
Yeah. ক্লাসিক্যালটা কোথায়? Unemployment. ঠিক আছে, unemployment can occur when the real wage rate lies above the full employment level. ঠিক আছে, এইখানটাতে there'll be renegotiation of money wages. So when we are there's bargaining between workers and firms, it is in terms of money wages, not real wages. Okay. So the contract is always set in terms of W, not M by W. So let me see. Okay. So in the classical model, the contract was set in terms of the money wage, which was which had to be perfectly flexible. So if you have excess demand for labor, what will happen to money wage?
So it should rise.
It should rise. Money wage increase will lead to demand for workers' labor falling. If you have excess supply, you have unemployment. In that case, money wage will.
False.
Okay. Therefore, will now be prepared to increase or hire more workers. Okay, so you have both an upward flexibility and downward flexible. The money wage can rise or fall depending upon whether you have excess demand or excess supply. The Keynesian point of the point at which Keynes departs from the classical model is there's money wage rigidity. In fact, what Keynes assumes is that if money wages can rise, but money wages will not fall. See, technically speaking, the latter Keynesians assumed that money wages were sticky. Sticky means they don't change. They try to it doesn't change very easily. Now, if we consider the very short run, it means we can interpret this to mean that money wages do not change. Sticky means it changes but at a very, very slow rate, and it takes a long time to change. But if we concentrate on the short run, if money wages are changing very slowly, in the short run, it doesn't change. It means it doesn't change at all. So we have money wage rigidity. Okay. But technically speaking, the Keynesians do assume that you have only downward wage rigidity in the short run. Now, why if there's unemployment, why don't workers accept a reduction in money wages? Keynes assumed that workers are interested in two things: the relative wages, but also in the absolute wages. So both the absolute wage, the W is important, but at the same time, let us suppose that you are one group of workers, working in the economic sector. There's another group of workers who are working in the sociology sector, another group working in the physics sector, and so on. All these are industries. The departments are the industries. The wages differ across the industries. So the wages that you are getting will depend upon the skill that you have. If you go to another sector, another industry, if they are more skilled, they will get more wages than you. If you go to a third sector and they do perform a less skilled work, then what should be the wages? It should be lower than what you are getting. মানে সোজা কথা, প্রত্যেকটা সেক্টরে, in every sector, workers have a different level of skill. And if you are more skilled, you get more wages. Is this point clear?
So could you repeat once?
Okay, what I'm saying is that see, in this sector, we have talked about aggregate demand, aggregate supply. We have looked at the economy as a whole, but in reality, the economy is divided into industries, right? You have different sectors or industries. Not an iron and steel industry, consumer goods sector, and so on.
Yes, sir.
Acha. Now, in each of the industries, the workers have a certain level of skill. For IT sector, you require a very high level of education and you require technical skill. But if you go to the other extreme, construction sector, is the skill level same?
No, sir.
Okay, so who should get higher wages or should they get the same wages?
Sir, looking at skill, the IT employee should be waged higher.
Should be wage higher. So you can think of a spectrum, right? You have different sectors. In each sector, workers have different skill levels. And as you move up the spectrum, the workers are more skilled and they will get higher wages. Okay? Let us take an example. তোমার তিনটে সেক্টর, ধরো চারটে সেক্টর আছে, four industries, S1, S2, S3, S4. And suppose the skill levels are like this, মানে এটা হচ্ছে twice of S1 এরকম আর কি। তাহলে ধরো তোমার এরকম একটা ধরে নিলাম। This is the wages in each sector. This is the আচ্ছা, এবার ধরো তোমার রিয়েল ওয়েজটা চেঞ্জ করলো। ঠিক আছে? Suppose prices was 1 and now it becomes 2. রিয়েল ওয়েজ কত ছিল? 10/1, 20/1, 30/1, 40/1। এখন কত হচ্ছে? You have to divide by 2. So what are the real wages now?
Sir, 10 by 2, 20
হ্যাঁ,
by 2,
ভ্যালুটা বলো।
5,
না না, এখানে
10, 5, 10,
হ্যাঁ
15, 20.
আচ্ছা। Look at the ratio, 10:20, and look at this ratio, 5:10. Is the ratio same?
Yes, sir.
আচ্ছা, 10 আর 30 আর 5 and 15.
Yes, sir, same.
So what is happening to the wage differential? Is it changing?
No, sir.
Okay. So that means, see, why are the wages different? Because of the differences in skill levels, right? Now, in this situation and this situation, the skill levels are the same, right? So the wage differences should also be the same. If I'm twice as skilled as you, I should always get twice what you are getting.
Yes, sir.
Yeah?
Yes, sir.
So if the real wages are changing, is this condition being satisfied?
Yes, sir. Like 5 into 2 is 10. So, yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. See, look at this line. The wage differentials can be measured by relative money wages. Okay. Okay. Now, what happens if when price level changes, all wages are affected symmetrically? So that means the wage differences remain the same. They still reflect differences in the skill levels. See, I'm twice as skilled as you. If the real wage changes, I'm still, my money wage may fall, but I'm still getting twice as you, right? So in that sense, there's no, the wage system is still fair. But suppose the money wage changes. Look, has everyone's money weight changed? Increased? Money wages has gone up in all the sectors, right? 10 to 15, 20 to 25, 30 to 50, 40 to 60, প্রত্যেকের এটা বেড়ে গেছে। Now tell me one thing, the skill levels are same. So what should I get? S2 should be twice of S1. Am I getting this here?
No, sir.
Who is gaining? S1 is gaining.
Yes, sir.
Acha, but look at S1 and S3.
So still S1 is gaining.
না এখানে কি হচ্ছে 10 to 30, which is 1/3. To ensure this, how much should have the wages gone up? 45.
Okay,
S3
yes,
has gone up more. So now who's gaining?
S3 is gaining.
Yeah. So now you have same skill levels, but now the wage gaps do not reflect the skill level, differences in skills. So all the workers are now going to be unhappy. Okay, you're not getting my skill level may be twice that of you, but I'm not getting twice your wages. So workers will believe that these new wage contracts are essentially unfair. They are not reflecting differences in the skill levels. Okay. So suppose someone goes up and tells you that, okay, you accept a wage cut. Will you accept it? You will always be afraid that, okay, if I accept the wage cut, maybe other workers in other sectors will not affect the wage cut. And then I'm in trouble. আমাদের যে রিলেটিভ গ্যাপগুলো সেটা চেঞ্জ হয়ে গেল। A more extreme form of inequity. So I accept a wage cut 10 to 5, but they don't accept a wage cut. They remain like this. What will happen? It was only twice. It should have been twice, but now it is 4 times. ঠিক আছে? So what happens is, if your real wage changes, it's across the board. The wage differentials remain the same and continue to reflect differences in the skill or productivity levels. So if there's a decline in real wage caused by the price level, workers will not resist this. They will not like this, certainly, but okay, it's acceptable. But if there's a fall in money wages, you feel that some people are gaining unfairly, and therefore you are going to resist a decline in money wages. So read Freud, page 141, 141 to 142. He's discussing this part, the sources on wage rigidity. The second source of downward wage rigidity is you have formal contracts. If the labor market is unionized, that is, you have unions, wages are not set by bargaining with individual workers. The union leaders go and bargain with the workers, and typically the contract is set in terms of 2 or 3 years. That means they say that, okay, in these 3 years or 2 years, this is the money wages. This is the wages that are going to be set. Okay, so during the contract, you cannot change the money wage. So if there's a shock, the workers, the employers want to reduce money wages. The unions will say, look, we signed a contract, you agreed to it, that you will not change money wages, and that means you can't change the money wage. It has to remain the same. If you want to increase, fine. We are fine with that. But we will not allow you to reduce the money wages. Sometimes in the contracts, what you have is you set a money wage that today this is 5,000 and every year it is going to go up by 5%. Or maybe the first year it is going to go up by 5%, second year by 7%, because you have inflation. This is called indexation. So you do have some flexibility in money wages, but it's not complete. So what happens is during this period, the period of the contract, money wages become sticky. You can't change it. You can only decide how much workers to employ. So you can increase or decrease your supply, your labor force. You can hire more workers, you can hire less workers, but you cannot change how much labor to how much to pay to the workers. Okay, so that means the labor supply function doesn't determine employment. You simply have the wages, and given the wages, the profit maximizing amount of labor is determined. So what you have is, this is the demand for labor. So given wages, you are going to hire this amount of labor. If in the next contract, this is the wages, you are going to hire less labor. Okay. And when this contract is in duration, that is W1, again, you'll see why it happens. You're simply going to, if there's a demand shock, you're simply going to hire less labor. We'll come to this actually in the next class. So if you don't understand this part, don't worry. I'll come back to this and I'll discuss this again. Why the labor supply function becomes unimportant. Let me know when you finish this. I'll move to the last slide. Oh,
Sir, done.
Okay, I'm shifting it. Okay. The third source of money wage rigidity is in the informal sector when you don't have any formal contracts. In that case, you just have an implicit verbal agreement that, okay, I'm going to hire you, and for 2 years, you're going to get this wages. After 2 years, we are going to renegotiate. So, if there's a demand shock, well, a verbal agreement is non binding. The employer can always break his word, but he will not do so even if he reduces wages, costs will go down and he can reduce prices, but he will not do so. Why? Because in that case, he gets a bad reputation. He has existing employees, relations with them deteriorate. In the future, when demand will revive, they will remember that, okay, he had hired me and said he would pay me 50 rupees per day, but when COVID broke out, he told me, sorry, I'm going to pay you 30 rupees. Similarly, the new workers also knows his reputation. He may hire you for 50 rupees, but he may not keep his word. So that means he may gain in the short run during depression. But if the economy revives and he requires more workers, then he's going to get in trouble. So in such cases, what he will do is he will continue to pay 50 rupees, what he had agreed on. But now what he's going to do is he will say that, look, I will pay you 50 rupees. But instead of coming 6 days a week, you have to come 3 days a week, and I'm going to give you 50 rupees per day, as we had agreed. Or simply, I'm sorry, I have to close down my factory. I'll still pay 50 rupees, but because there's no demand, out of the 10 workers, 4 I cannot pay for. You'll have to leave. So the adjustment is not in money wages, but in the amount of labor used, either in number of labors or in the amounts worked per laborer. Okay, is it clear?
So could you show a previous slide once, like the classical tenets, the central tenet slide?
This one.
Yes, sir. So the next slide once. So the next three slides comes under this subheading only.
Yeah, yeah. So these are the sources of wage rigidity. You have 3 sources. Okay. So then the next part becomes that, okay, money wages are rigid downwards. If we how to incorporate that, and what will be the impact on the market, on the economy. Okay. So we'll discuss that in the next class.